Hi. Okay, so I've touched on this issue before in my top 11 worst episode of Supernatural list, but I wanted to clarify my opinion on this for any record that may exist out there. Anybody who cares about this, I'll annotate the video even. Okay, so was the sex that happened between the Reaper in April and Castiel rape? I don't believe that this is a yes or no issue. I think that there's nuance here. While I think that a case can be made for rape, I think that case can also be questioned. Whether or not it was rape from the human April side comes down to two questions. First one being, did the Reaper who possessed April need her permission in order to possess her? We have an answer to this because the writers now have made Reapers angels, or angels Reapers, or whatever. We know that Reapers, like angels, need permission to enter a person's body and make them their vessel. There's also a line of dialogue in the episode from the Reaper saying that April didn't mind, her entering, the Reaper entering April at all. Now, I know some will say that even if April consented to have her body used, she didn't really consent to have that body used for sex, and I agree with that. However, we also have to consider whether or not the real April was still inhabiting her body when the Reaper took over. As I've said many times before, Supernatural is bad at world building. The creative team has a tendency to be overly vague on the mythology of their universe and put in information at the plot as the plot demands, but still all too often find a way to contradict the rules from their mythos that have already been established. So we don't know how Reaper possession works, whether or not the host person dies when the Reaper enters that person. And I think we have, there's enough in the episode to question whether or not the real April is still around. When the Reaper talks about April, it's in the past tense, and she says how that April is the old April, and that the Reaper misses being her. So, was there a sexual violation of April's person? I think it's a maybe, but I personally lean towards a no. Was there a sexual violation for Castiel? The people who think that there was usually bring up 2 points. The first one being that Castiel couldn't properly consent because he was homeless at the time, and the Reaper was in a position of power to give him food and shelter. I don't agree with this at all. I mean, first of all, I'm not a cultural Marxist, so I don't think that the answer to every bad social situation is who has the most power or privilege or whatever, like to suss that out of who was in the wrong of that situation. Right, but let's look at the issue anyway. First of all, the Reaper never solicits Castiel for sex. She never makes reference to expecting some type of payment for letting Castiel stay at her apartment, nor does Castiel say, either implicitly or explicitly, that he is willing to sleep with her for the kindness she shows him. I know the episode is very badly written, but you can see Misha and the actress who plays April acting their asses off to make chemistry happen between them. In the episode, Castiel has sex with April because he likes her and for no other reason. But even if Castiel entered into some sort of contract where he engaged in sex for goods and or services, that would be prostitution and not rape. But the stronger piece of evidence for Castiel being raped is this. He did not know that April was a Reaper, or the vessel of a Reaper, if you want to be more accurate, and probably would not have slept with her had he known who she really was. I agree with that, but even in this case, I think we can paint the situation in more colors by asking whether or not the Reaper took advantage of Castiel's attraction of April based on her real characteristics, or if she knowingly seduced him starting from the moment she saw him. Did she ever think to herself, I'm going to get me a piece of angel ass, and then knowingly went after him? So asking if it was rape for Cass, I think that it was again a maybe, but I'm leaning more strongly towards a yes in his case. However, there's an even greater question here that I really think needs to be asked, and that is, does it really matter? It almost seems ridiculous to me to make so much of this issue because the Reaper is a villain. She also stabs Cass to death and possibly murdered April for using her body. But nobody really mentions that. Villains lie, steal, kill, fuck people over, manipulate others, and they do it with a smile on their face, or at the very least have done mental gymnastics to convince themselves that even though they are doing horrible things, they are in the right. How is rape the only crime a villain cannot commit? I know that people who think that rape in fiction is so horrible are the ones who think that there is a rape culture. I don't think there is. And there's this amazing atheist video, which I can also annotate, where he goes through a list of why feminists think rape culture is a part of our culture, and he refutes all of them. TJ Kirk is an incendiary person, but in this video he is very articulate and explains himself well. There's a point on the list about rape in fiction, and he asks what examples are there in media where the protagonist of a story that who we're supposed to empathize with and think is a good guy is a rapist. He can only think of one example, an old Clint Eastwood movie. I can think of at least one more, which is Titus Polo from the TV show Rome. It is implied that he has raped women. I don't think we see him do it during the actual narrative, but it's referred to that he has raped in the past. One of the reasons why Rome is such a good show is that the creative team took great care to reproduce the culture of ancient Rome and present the mores as the people of the time knew them, the social mores. If you want to say ancient Rome had a rape culture or was a rape culture, then I think you could make a good case for that. But that doesn't mean that we live in a culture like theirs, where rape isn't seen as one of the worst crimes in fiction, that is set in modern times. Sorry. In fact, I'd say the quickest way to establish that a male villain is a villain is to have him commit some sort of act of violence or violation against a woman. Hell, even for him to say something misogynistic is usually enough for the audience to know that he is a scummy and not very good person. The Amazing Atheist points out that in fiction we see rape as an even worse crime than murder, which is why, quote, that is why I think you can have shows about Hannibal Lecter, a cannibal. You can have shows about Dexter, a serial killer. You can have shows like The Sopranos about mobsters. You can have shows about hitmen. But I've never seen a show like, hey, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to have a very sympathetic serial rapist. That show would never ever happen. So, and obviously I agree with him. Okay, I'm sure I pissed a fair few people off. Hopefully no more than I usually do. I'm guessing that most people kind of know what to expect from me by now, and sort of what my opinions on things are. So yeah, that's everything. Sayonara, auf Wiedersehen.